Okay, so organization, political and social organization, nuclear and extended family, lineage, owning farmland. Again, I was talking about kind of a traditional kind of ownership rather than a private property. You wouldn't be able to sell your farmland for something else, which is a different level of private. Farming groups tended to be matrilineal. So if you were part of a Iroquois tribe or a primarily farming village, you would have most likely been matrilineal descent, and also matrilocals. So arranged marriages were common, and then ultimately the men would move into the women's families' longhouse. This is fascinating because a lot of times with agriculture, we get a move to patrilineal, and that has more to do with, again, selling and private property. In these groups, hunting equaled, if you were primarily a hunter-gatherer, you were patrilineal, which is, again, these things don't always, the lineages don't always match up the way that we think that they should or correlate. Sometimes matrilineal is associated with hunter-gatherers. So again, these are not universals in this area either. Let's see. Longhouses were, we'll get into the material culture in a bit. Longhouses were primarily the residence, material residence for the Iroquois and some of these other groups in the Northeast. And they were basically apartment complexes within a giant building. And I'll kind of go back to that a little bit. Women did the farming, men helped the planting and did the hunting. Infants were carried around by mothers, again, in kind of on their body, and obviously the whole same kind of thing that you see in other groups as well. Three main types of political structure. We're looking at bands, tribes, and confederacies. We're adding confederacies. This is a bit more of a larger political structure. Okay, so Sachems and Sajamores were the leaders at any level. It's kind of a chief leadership style. Town council, right? So you would have your Sachems, which would be maybe your family leadership or your headmen. They would come to join the town council. And then the tribe would be a larger council made up of representatives of that town council. Okay, and then the confederacy would be multiple tribes, okay, with those prominent leaders from those larger councils or larger town councils, or tribal councils. So this is the confederacy, and then they would kind of pass down rules and laws working together. This is a version of representative government, correct? People pass over power to these people of importance. These people of importance start to make decisions for the group. And the Confederacy, the League of the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois, really is kind of, is not just kind of, it's famous in terms of the Native American organizational structure and laws and what they used. It would be fascinating to know what this group would have looked like had there not been contact. Remember, kind of the 1500s is really when, and maybe a little bit before, the Confederacy forms. So it doesn't have much time before that kind of 1620 time period when old world Europeans are coming in and kind of messing with their way of life. Had it grown and prospered, it would have been an interesting kind of political study, to be honest. So the Powhatan also had a confederacy. This is, again, this representative, right? You go with the town council made up of headmen of the family level or band level, and then you go up to the tribal or the tribal council that has representatives from those different towns, and then you go up to the confederacy, which is representatives from the tribal level. So again, it's like our government structure, to be honest, in a certain regard. Warfare. I could spend all day talking about warfare among the Iroquois. They definitely had warfare. And again, I'm not out to disprove warfare. It's more about what are the impetus. Remember, if human beings are cooperative and have altruism and have empathy, which we're starting to get a lot of biological studies showing us that humans have have been able to prosper and be where we are today because of cooperation. We might focus on all the conflict, but that has not always been in our past, right? However, something in this area, whether it be farming or kind of these revenge killings or whatever else, warfare was definitely prominent here. One interesting fact, and I don't know that your book covers it, I don't think that it did, is that women, right? We have a hierarchy of power. We're looking at chiefs, mostly male kind of structure. However, when we had female anthropologists go in and kind of look at these groups and look at the history, we get a different kind of spin on things. War was ultimately a decision of the women. So if men wanted to go to war, they had to pass this through the women, and it's because the women controlled the distribution of food. And again, this has a lot of power. People would say, well, it's a ranked society. Well, for me, if I have basic needs that need to be filled, and that is food, and the women are controlling that, I would say that they actually have the most real power in the tribe or the confederacy. So again, if men wanted to go off to war, they would have to get approval through women so that the women would actually feed them during war. Women could withhold food, and then basically the men would stop warring. This is a control mechanism. And again, this is probably coming out of some egalitarian model or way of dealing with conflict, right? And also gender roles, okay? So when we look at a hierarchy structure, you can see that actually the women have a lot of power. So is it gender powered? Is it biased in that way? I would also kind of argue on the side of females to a certain degree. We also know that a lot of early Iroquois research, even written by missionaries, actually has them looking more like kind of an egalitarian model where, you know, the missionaries would show up and they would ask who's in charge, and they would set a woman forward. And this happened. So again, getting into kind of that issue, gender also is covered in one of your readings for the week. Diganawida and Hiawatha, super important figures in this Iroquois Haudenosaunee legend, right? And they are the peacemakers of the League. Ultimately, they go around and they see all this fighting, and the tribes or the different groups, the Seneca and the Oneida and the other 4 tribes are just at war together. They're just constantly fighting each other. And these guys go around and basically preach peace. So they come up with kind of these rules, and they really are promoting this idea of the great law of peace and form a certain level of constitution. So if you guys want to do any follow-up research into that idea, it's super fascinating. The tough part is a lot of it's based on oral tradition, but all of these tribes in this confederacy talk about these 2 folks and having great importance in terms of bringing them together in this peaceful way. And again, this is going to help form the confederacy. Okay, material culture, again, skins, clothing, housing, boat material, bone, antler, stone, and wood, all used as tools or decorative items. This is probably true for all the Native Americans that have these resources around. Deer scapula would be used for hoes in the cornfield. So if you're wondering, well, what do they use if they didn't have metal? It wasn't necessarily stone, but deer scapula are hard bones and big enough to act as these kind of agricultural tools. Housing, talked about the long houses. We're looking at 150 feet long by 20 feet wide, and they would be divided up into sections of basically apartments with multiple families living in those long houses. Food would be stored outside. They used 2 types of canoes. Dugouts, right, where you literally use a stone tool or hammered copper, whatever you have, to carve out a tree, right? And you're just carving out the hole in the tree to create or at least half of the tree, to create the dugout. The bark canoes are more put together kind of in a different structure. And again, we still used kind of the canoe design today. Obviously, ours are more maybe plastic or whatever they are, metal, aluminum, right? But the same design is there in this canoe structure. Animal fat was used for protection against these bugs, kind of a fascinating one. Pottery, basketry, and textiles were all important to them. Bow and arrow, weapon of war, and also a hunting mechanism. And then the tomahawk was definitely a weapon of war. It was a hatchet, right? That was handheld. You could throw it, but it was much more for closer combat. All right, religion and art. The religion of these groups, the world was populated by spirits, animism, everything had spirits. Rocks, trees, rivers, mountains, hills, everything had spirits. And they should all be recognized and respected. This is the big kind of goal in the religious renewal. Keep spirits happy and world renewal were the goals. Green corn ceremony was a renewal and Thanksgiving. This is kind of, if you want to know where our Thanksgiving comes from, it's a harvest, and it's basically the corn harvest during this time period. Dreams were really, really important to these people, so much that they acted on them to appease spirits. This is a little, I would say, cool and creepy at the same time, depending on what your dreams are like. But people acted on their dreams as if they were part of their own kind of being and consciousness in order to appease the spirits that were kind of interrelating to them within the dream world. The dead journeyed to afterlife, so everybody believed that people all went to an afterlife. So this is a kind of a new development, at least with the northeastern peoples, in terms of the afterlife that is universal, right? That everybody goes there. It's not a structure that kind of Judeo-Christianity has. It's kind of a you go here or you go here. It's not a hierarchy. Let's see. Prayers and offerings for the dead were also a vital part. They used what was called charnel houses. Charnel houses are where you would let the body sometimes decompose outside on rafters or scaffolding, and then you would collect the bones and bury them later. So burial was part of their deal. And then the Wampum Belt that's a picture of the Wampum Belt. Again, these are the beads that they put together. And the Iroquois used the Wampum Belt to record events. This would be like, I don't know if you guys know the Inca or the Quechua word quipu. Quipu was knots to record events, so they were symbolic. These specific knots that they would put into rope down in Peru. This would be similar. They would record events based on the design element of the Wampum Belt. Okay, Northeast people of today. Many of the groups fled. So it talks about the Shawnee and the Delaware people or natives basically being forced to Oklahoma. And again, the American government basically said, you know what, this is the land out in Oklahoma. We're never going to want it or need it. So they pushed them out there. Now, when they found oil, the problems occurred. But problems for the natives occurred once they got kicked off their land. Many groups were relocated or basically decimated, right? And in terms of contact, these groups were probably the most, aside from the California natives, just genocide was the word that we can use. They were wiped out, right? They were not seen as part of the progressive American agenda. Reservations, there are some reservations for the Powhatan in Virginia. They're small, they're not large. But these groups are looking to band together lost tribe members and bring people back in order to do things like revitalize language, bring back their religion, and kind of start to bring back their culture. So in a sense, the awareness is coming about, and people are really trying to bring those things back and locate people that may be members of these lost tribes that were basically pushed out or relocated. Casinos are a big deal, obviously, to the native groups. Your book talks about a few of the big ones in Connecticut and the Oneida and some of those other groups have large casinos up kind of the eastern seaboard of the United States. And this is one way that they're making money and kind of actually funding this kind of revitalization. So it's kind of a fascinating turn of events in terms of being able to prosper in this way. So again, you're going to want to read the case studies for the Iroquois and the Ottawa. And again, pay close attention to the economics, the social organization, political organization, religion, the cosmology, right? The creation stories. There's some fascinating, cool stuff in there. And then Hiawatha has a little bit of a VIP thing, and so does Pocahontas. You're going to want to look at those for the week. That's all that I have for the week. Again, we're in week 13, and we only have a couple weeks left with the research paper, so you guys are going to want to finish those.